let's have a look at the snatch, one of the technically more complex of the exercises that can be executed with the kettlebell, although, on the other hand, also one of the most complete exercises that can be executed with the kettlebell. In fact, in the snatch we find the power and extension of the hips that we learned in the swing, the coordination between the hips and the shoulder girdle that we learned in the clean, and the strength and stability of the torso and shoulder girdle on the frontal plane that we learned in the military press, in the overhead squat, and in the windmill. So, the snatch brings together all the essential elements of the other fundamental exercises for training with the kettlebell, and precisely for this reason, the snatch can be learned correctly only after having learned the correct executive technique of the other basic exercises of kettlebell training: the swing, the clean, the military press, the single overhead squat, and the windmill. Let's take a look at the educational progression we need to follow when learning the executive technique of the snatch. The first thing we need to be sure to have perfected before executing the snatch must be the correct management of the overhead position. The objective of the snatch is to bring the kettlebell into the overhead position, starting off from the power and extension of the hips, then using the strength and the stability of the torso and the shoulder girdle, and finally the speed of the arm. To improve the overhead position, we can use free body joint mobility exercises first and leave the kettlebell to a later time, because in addition to mobility, we need to condition the stability of the shoulder that is essential when we have to manage a very unstable load, like the kettlebell, in the overhead position. So, for improving this stabilization, we can use exercises such as hip flexors and arm bar. In the snatch, we need to bring the kettlebell from the ground into the overhead position through a ballistic movement that requires great hip power and arm speed. For this, it is essential to know how to stabilize the arm in the position of the kettlebell's arrival in the overhead position, as the kettlebell will arrive with great speed, and if we're not able to stabilize it, there is a serious possibility of causing shoulder and spinal injuries. After having learned to correctly manage the overhead position, the next step to learn is the execution of the eccentric phase of the snatch, when the kettlebell goes down from the overhead position. So, execute a repetition of single clean. Bring the kettlebell into the overhead position through a repetition of single military press, and then execute the eccentric phase of the snatch. In the eccentric phase, the kettlebell must not be slowed down by the arm, but has to descend through the force of gravity without any slowing. A common mistake is to launch the arm forwards, because this leads to unbalancing forwards due to the pull of the kettlebell. The goal is to let the kettlebell fall close to the body, so that it's easier to manage the control of the body's center of gravity during the eccentric phase of the exercise, in which the kettlebell takes on great speed. Obviously, do not flex the elbows too much, because this would make the approach of the kettlebell to the body very dangerous. The correct technique involves slightly moving the arm forwards, then, while slightly flexing the elbow, turn the hand inwards. This allows the kettlebell to turn over the hand and project downwards. Continue to keep the shoulder well stable backwards and downwards through the lat. Keep the torso, the pelvis, and the legs very stable, and just as the arm passes the line of the chest, start to bring the pelvis into anteversion. Then the arm continues going down, and just as it passes the navel, be quick to flex the hips backwards and the torso forwards to allow the forearm to come to rest on the inner thigh. At this point, The kettlebell will help load the extensor muscle chain of the hips eccentrically, which you'll need to execute the subsequent concentric phase. To learn how to connect the descent from the overhead position to the next concentric phase of the hips extension, we can execute, as a training exercise, a descent of the kettlebell from the overhead position, immediately followed by a repetition of single swing. Clean, press, descent, swing. Once you have learned how to manage the phase of the kettlebell's descent from the overhead position, you can move on to learn how to execute the concentric phase, where, after the extension of the hips, you have to bring the kettlebell back into the overhead position. The fundamental concept to remember is that the snatch starts off from the swing. Therefore, the initial phase always starts with a powerful extension of the hips. Start off by executing a repetition of swing. Then in the second repetition, rather than stopping with the arm in line with the shoulder, bring it up higher until it is above the head, keeping it completely distended. On the third repetition, after having executed a high swing, execute a repetition of another exercise, called the high pull. As well as being a preparatory exercise for the snatch, the high pull is also an exercise in itself that, exactly like the snatch, is used to condition the coordination between the power and extension of the hips on the sagittal plane and the speed of the arm through the strength and stability of the torso and the shoulder girdle. In the high pull exercise, after reaching the position of the high swing, pull the kettlebell backwards using the lats and the adductors of the shoulder blade while partially flexing the elbow, but do not pull it completely backwards, otherwise the kettlebell will turn and destabilize you. Just as you execute the phase of the high pull, quickly distend the arm forwards before the kettlebell descends downwards. This is the phase in which the exercise becomes like the descent phase of a single swing. So execute one repetition of swing, one of high swing, and one of high pull. The high pull is a necessary preparatory exercise for the snatch because it teaches a fundamental concept in the execution of the snatch, that of not always keeping the arm completely taut during the concentric phase of the snatch. In fact, if the objective of the snatch is to condition the coordination between the power and extension of the hips on the sagittal plane and the speed of the arm on the sagittal and frontal planes, to allow the kettlebell to turn on the hand without smashing into the arm, you must be quick to flex and then immediately afterwards extend the elbow. It is not possible to execute the snatch while always keeping the arm taut. In the event of a mistake, in fact, in addition to not being effective in terms of conditioning the coordination, strength, and speed, the snatch would actually be dangerous for the arm, as well as for the shoulder and spine. Instead, the goal is to pass the hand under the kettlebell without it banging against the forearm. So, the snatch starts with the power and extension of the hips, continues with the pulling of the kettlebell backwards, and ends with the distension of the arm up, while the kettlebell turns on the hand and arrives in the overhead position. Now let's see the execution of these preparatory exercises that allow us to connect the swing to the overhead position during the concentric phase of the snatch. Swing, high pull. Change side. Swing, high pull. Change side. Swing, high pull. Change side. Swing, high pull. At this point, after having executed this sequence of 3 exercises, at the 4th repetition, we must continue to pull the kettlebell backwards to allow it to turn, and then be very quick to distend the arm to be able to bring the kettlebell correctly into the overhead position. Clearly, the first few times we execute this exercise, as we're still not coordinated with the movements, the kettlebell can come crashing into the forearm. But continuing to practice these preparatory exercises will improve the coordination between the hips, the shoulder girdle, and the arm, and you will perfect the technique of the snatch. Now let's see the execution of this sequence of 4 exercises. Swing, high pull, snatch. Change side. Swing, high pull, snatch. To further improve the coordination in the final phase of the exercise, execute a combination of the last 2 exercises, high pull and snatch. High pull, snatch. High pull, snatch. Change side. High pull, snatch. High pull, snatch. An exercise that we can use to improve the coordination of the final phase of the snatch during the transition from high pull to the overhead position consists in slightly opening the hand in the final phase when the kettlebell turns towards the forearm. So, the hand does not remain closed, but opens slightly. Opening the hand helps the kettlebell to slow down, because inside the hand it will have more surface contact during the rotation. And this greater friction will act to slow the kettlebell's passage. This gives the arm more time to distend up into the overhead position while the kettlebell is arriving. So, we can execute repetitions of snatch with this variation of the hand opening while the kettlebell is turning in the hand. This allows us to train the coordination of the last phase of the snatch without the kettlebell crashing into the forearm. Obviously, we have to be quick to close the hand before bringing the kettlebell down in the eccentric phase of the exercise. Let's see the execution of this preparatory exercise. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. In the complete technique of the snatch, keep the hand closed, but without gripping the handle too much, as it must be able to turn fluidly during the rotation of the kettlebell, both at the end of the concentric phase and at the beginning of the eccentric phase. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale.